Okay, everybody. Again, this is primarily for our Spark character group, but who knows who may end up seeing this later on. And with that said, all of our Spark character people, this guy needs no introduction whatsoever. You all know him very, 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 very well. But for anybody who may not know who he is, I'm going to do my best to give him a real quick introduction. Jaris Cunningham. This is his 6th year teaching social studies. All 6 years have been here at IKCA. We're very lucky and fortunate to have him here. Before that, studied psychology at Bethune-Cookman and Florida Atlantic University. Worked for the Walt Disney Company for about 10 years. Coordinator and trainer for about 4 years. One of the thespian troupe directors. And I want to kind of expand on that. Not only are you one of the thespian troupe group directors, but that group has had incredible success since you've been here. Because you just talk a little bit about that, because it's not all you do, of course, but it is one of your passions, and had a lot of success. Can you say what has been accomplished with that group?
Thank you, man. It's cool to hear that, but it's really cool to hear about just the thespian troupe, just because, outside of me watching the kids, develop their talent and use it and go on to do great things is really cool. While I was at Bethune, actually, my major was music education. So I've always loved music. It wasn't until I got here to IKCA where I kind of was like, all right, this theater thing is pretty cool. And so since 2015, the thespian troupe has been involved in the Florida Thespian Society, where they get an opportunity to learn lots of different theatrical pieces and musical pieces, and they go on to compete in the district level and then at the state level. And we've just been really fortunate enough to have some really talented kids. I have the numbers written down somewhere, but I haven't thought about it in a while. But at those competitions, they get recognized based on lots of different criteria. And we've walked away from a lot of those district and state competitions with, I want to say, over 100 superior medals. Close to that in excellent medals as well. And then what I consider like our crowning moment was a couple years ago. We went to states. We always do well at states, but one year, not only did we get best in show at districts, but we also got best in show in the state of Florida for one of our pieces. And like that, there's a lot for that. Our whole group, our whole director group, Mr. Mahoney, Mr. Van Tassel, all of us pour their time in, but it's really those kids who put that time in, listen to the instructions, they take it in, they change what they need to change, and then the results speak for themselves. So it's just been really cool to just be a part of that just for a little bit, So yeah.
It's very cool. And it's interesting that you talk about basically saying that those kids own their performances at these things. And that's a pretty good segue into the topic. But before we get there, also need to mention and point out that he does many things. I've already mentioned that he teaches social studies here at IKCA. He's also obviously one of the directors on the thespian group, but he's also a flag football coach and has been for the last 6 years. So the guy does a lot. And as you can see by his resume, he's worked with a lot of adults and young people alike. And because of that, I think that he is probably the best person that I know personally to talk about this concept of ownership. And one more thing, he's a huge Green Bay Packers fan. So if you want any gifts, if you need gift ideas, anything, go Pack Go. We'll work.
Yeah. Go Pack Go.
There he is. So we're talking about this idea of ownership, and it's easy in the context since you are into sports and into theater. Those are two forms of teams, of course. And we know that for these types of teams to be successful, there has to be a level of ownership by each individual team member. But outside of the spectrum of sports, let's just talk about character in general. I guess I'll start with this question. In the context of character, what does it mean to have or to take ownership? And then once we can define what that is, why does it matter?
It's easy, I think. Like you said, I know it's outside of the realm of sports. It's easy to talk about it there for students, I think, and maybe even for even adults. It's probably hard to think about outside of that, because in sports and in those things, you are talking about a team where you understand that you play a small part. But I think the larger task is thinking about it when it's just you, like by yourself. Why is that important? One, I say because you're never really by yourself. As an individual, I'm a part of the human race, and the way I interact with people, the way they interact with me affects so many different things. So why is it important for me to own my decisions? because it's going to affect my life and it's going to have a direct effect around with the people who are around me. So ownership of my decision making, ownership of not just what I do, but what I say, because of the effects it's going to have. Not only, again, not only in my own life, but how it affects other people around me, how it's going to affect the way people view me. And maybe even the way that I view myself based upon, how I proceed based after I make decisions, consciously thinking about decisions before you make them, thinking about things before you say them, and then immediately being able to decide afterwards, I'm going to be responsible. Because when we talk about ownership, we're really talking about responsibility, I think. I'm going to be responsible for what I say and what I do, and I'm not going to blame it on somebody else. I almost owe it to the people around me that if I do make a decision, or when I make a decision, that I need to take responsibility for it. I almost feel like it's our way of kind of getting through this life together. Is you taking ownership, you being responsible for the things that you do.
Yeah, I like the interchangeability of responsibility and ownership. That's a concept that I think a lot of people would be able to understand. Responsibility. You throw the word ownership out there, and that may get lost. And how does that relate to character? What's the same thing? It's the
Yeah.
same. That's good. So, what common traits do you see with people who struggle with this concept? So, again, we don't always have to talk about 6th, 7th, and 8th grade boys, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade girls. We can talk about people of any age, in any culture. What are some of the commonalities? You worked at Disney for a long time, large groups, a big team there, of course, and of
Yeah.
course here at school. What are the common things that you see with these people that struggle with this idea, this concept?
It could be a lack of I don't want to say a lack of honesty or lack of transparency. Um, the inability to understand, like I just described, that they themselves are responsible for their own actions, and because they're disconnected from that concept of, well, I own this myself. They're not as honest about things. And I know we said, we're not talking about students, and that's fine, because you see that in adults when they have to make decisions or when things have to come about. They're maybe guarded in the way that they approach things, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. There could be many reasons why people are guarded, but understanding that in order for the responsibility for me to trust somebody, I've got to see them be honest. I've got to see them be transparent with whatever it is that they what they're presenting. What else? I feel like people struggle with when it comes to ownership. Just being able to deal with the consequences. I don't know how to encapsulate that into one word, but unable to deal with consequences. And so if you are afraid of specific consequences, then of course you're not going to want to take responsibility, because I think we see this a lot in lots of places as well. You can relate this back to a team. If I know I have to make a decision and I'm afraid it's going to affect everybody, then I won't make the decision necessarily, because I want somebody else to. And I kind of take a back seat and let them take the onus for it. So again, I don't know how to encapsulate that in one word, but that's,
I think one of the connecting themes that I always attach to someone who's afraid or is ignorant to this concept of ownership is selfishness. They tend to approach life through a lens of what's in it for me, or if I were to own this mistake that I made, or if I were to own that decision, it's going to impact me negatively. So I'm just not going to do it. I'm going to say that wasn't me. It wasn't my fault. I didn't do it. And give a list of reasons why they can justify it. So
yeah,
I think
agree.
that's common.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's that making, that disconnection between you and the people around you. You know what I mean? Like, I'm only worried about how it affects me. So I'm not going to consider you, or I won't, necessarily, like you said, take ownership in this, because I'm not concerned, with how it affects you.
You've already kind of touched on this idea of in the beginning of a connection between being able to own your thoughts, feelings, actions, and this idea of being mature. Explain that. What is the connection between ownership and being able to own things and having maturity?
I think, for me, I just think about the concept of growth, right? As an individual, the practice of taking more responsibility for the things that you are involved in leads to more growth. And obviously that is, like a synonym of maturity, but that's what we're looking for, you know, here as teachers. Like, that's what we're looking for, is this saying that once you've committed to doing something, I've committed to this idea, and no matter the outcome, I know that if it's something that goes negative, if it's negative, you know, then hey, I accept that, I can move on, and I can grow from that. You reap the benefits if it's good, because you've made the right decision. Also, there's a morality thing there, I too think, between ownership, and maturity, and just who you are as a person, what your values are. You may start off with a different set of values that aren't necessarily, you know, considered of the highest moral fiber, but the more you continue to do that, you even grow in those, and those change a bit based upon what you're receiving. So I think that it's really about growth. I think that is the connection. That's what you're looking for. It's almost the end goal. You know, we're growing by continuing to take responsibility for things.
And because you know this very well, we both work, you know, we work with 6th, 7th, and 8th grade people all the time, and we know that that's often what we want, or what they want. They want to be treated as if they are mature, right? And so with that, how would you encourage a young person, or even an adult, because again, this is something we can all struggle with, how would you encourage somebody who seems to be struggling with this idea of being able to take ownership? Because I'll be honest with you, Jay, I mean, I know adults that really struggle with this. There's grown men and women out there in our world that really struggle with owning their performance at their job. They struggle with owning their performance with their kids. They struggle with owning their performance as a friend or as a family member. And so I just wonder, if you could give advice to somebody who's struggling with that, what would you do? What would you say?
I think if I just were to internalize, and I think oftentimes when giving advice to anyone, I think I personally, coach, is kind of like turning to myself. I'm thinking, what's the goal? What will be the goal for me? Generally, you know what I mean? Like, obviously everybody has their own specific set of goals, but generally, what's the goal for me? What's the goal for me with taking ownership? And it's learning, it's becoming a better person. It's in every aspect of my life, not just maybe in the way I treat people, but, you know, in finances, in so many different areas. How do you, I want to be better. If you go into something thinking that when I leave the situation, I want to be on the path to being a better person, you have to take responsibility, because it is from taking responsibility that if you mess up, and I meant to say this earlier about messing up, right? Like, when we mess up with something, obviously, immediately there's this negative feeling, but that negative feeling only perpetuates when you don't say, I messed up, I need to fix it. If you try to cover it up, you know, if you blame somebody else, you know what I mean? I know we try not to do this, but thinking about sports, you mess up, I'm throwing you this pass and you dropped it. That's the quarterback's fault. You're never going to go out and continue to work on your hands because you think it's somebody else's fault. So when you have these interactions with people, maybe you hurt somebody's feelings and so on. Well, you know, they shouldn't be so sensitive. No, maybe you should really think about what you're saying to people and how it could affect them. So I honestly think it's looking in yourself and deciding, do you want to be a better person? Do you want to, not only do you want to feel like you're a better person, how do you want to be viewed? Do you want people to change the way they view, change the way people react to you? Then you've got to start taking responsibility for your actions and doing it as soon as you can. That doesn't mean, you know, taking time to think about how something could have changed, but it means if I messed up, I need to say I messed up, and say it to yourself first. I think a lot of times with students, the reason why they get kind of, tongue-tied is because I don't want to face this person in front of me about how I messed up. Well, face yourself first. If you can face yourself first, then eventually facing somebody else about how you messed up, that's old hat, because you've already done it with the person that mainly matters first. And that's you getting over it, forgiving yourself, and understanding that it's all a part of growing up and becoming who you want to be. So that ownership is huge. It's so huge. I literally was talking to students today, again, about football and, just sports in general, and we hear it all the time. It's become this, this thing that's said in sports is do your job. Not only do your job, but get better at your job. Get better at your job. And as an individual, you have the ability to contribute to that sport. As an individual, I have the ability to contribute to the humans around me if I'm first responsible for what I say, what I do, and the outcome of the things I do and say.
Yeah, that's all valuable. I circle back to this idea. I can't seem to shake it in my head you talked about this idea that the connection between maturity and ownership, and because especially young people, they just naturally want to ascend quicker than is natural, right? If when they're 8, they want to be 16, and when they're 16, they want to be 20, and you get that because we were in the same position.
Right.
But one of the major ways that I think they can demonstrate, and I think you've already said this, I just want to reiterate it, is if they can demonstrate that they have the capacity and the willingness, because they have to have both, to own their decisions. I don't know if there's anything that I can think of that speaks more loudly that they're deserving of that respect, that they're deserving of that treatment as being a more mature person than that. Because I see 7th and 8th grade kids in particular almost on a daily basis that they'll try to shade themselves from the ownership of particular actions. And most of the time, this stuff is super minor. It's not even big things. These things don't carry a lot of weight. But again, that speaks volumes to me that they're not prepared for, I think, what they're saying they want.
Right.
What they're saying they want is to be treated as a certain way, but their actions are showing that they're not quite ready for that.
Yeah.
Because until you can own your small mistakes and little things that you do wrong, how can I treat you any differently than what you're showing me? So I think that's a big deal too. And again, I know we talk and we focus on young people, but it's not isolated. I mean, it's anybody. Anybody can experience that. So very good stuff, man. I appreciate you, Mr. J. I know that you don't like to hear a lot of this stuff, but I'm going to say it anyway because you deserve it. You're very humble. I can't think of a character-minded, a servant-minded, a energy-giving minded person that I know that is higher on those levels than you. So many times you have helped me get to work and to stay at work. And so I appreciate you for that. You are an incredible mentor and advisor to now hundreds of kids, both that have went on to high school and some that are in college already. So I just, on behalf of all of those people and all the kids that are here and all the staff that are here, thank you for doing this because this is extra. And thank you for doing your job and getting better at your job every day. I appreciate you, man, very, very much.
Listen, whoever I am is because of working with people like you. You know what I mean? Working with people like you and having those students be able to feel like they're comfortable enough to talk to me and let me give them a few words. Those things are important. Colleagues and friends like you working with each other to do that stuff. That's the only reason why I'm anything. So thank you, man.
Mr. J, thank you for your time, man. I appreciate you.
Yes, sir.
See ya.